Why do toxic people hate healthy boundaries? When peace becomes your greatest weapon, the smartest way to deal with toxic people. Welcome, everyone. This is LanceScurvX, the Scurv podcast, and we have another deep dive into human nature. There comes a point in life when you realize that not every battle deserves your attention. That's a lesson that many of us learn the hard way after we've invested years trying to explain ourselves, defend our intentions, or convince people to see the truth that was standing right in front of them all along. Too many good-hearted people waste their best years trying to earn respect from those who never intended to give it. By the time they recognize what has happened, they've already sacrificed their confidence, their joy, and pieces of themselves that should have never been placed on the bargaining table. The painful reality is that toxic people rarely introduce themselves as toxic. If they did, we'd all know to stay away. Instead, they often arrive wearing the mask of kindness, friendship, romance, family, concern, or opportunity. They know exactly how to make you feel seen, appreciated, and understood before slowly replacing those emotions with confusion, guilt, and self-doubt. It's not always loud. It's not always dramatic. More often than not, it's a slow erosion that takes place so quietly that you don't notice what's happening until your inner peace has already been compromised. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing that intelligence alone protects them from manipulation. It doesn't. Some of the brightest minds in the world have found themselves trapped in unhealthy relationships, destructive friendships, toxic workplaces, and emotionally draining family dynamics. Knowledge alone isn't enough. What protects you is awareness. It's the willingness to stop judging people by what they promise and start paying attention to what they repeatedly do. Actions never grow tired of telling the truth, even when words are working overtime to hide it. We've been conditioned to believe that giving people endless chances somehow proves our character. While forgiveness certainly has its place, repeated tolerance of disrespect isn't a virtue. It's often an invitation for someone to continue crossing lines they should have never approached in the first place. Every time you ignore behavior that violates your peace, you silently teach that person that your boundaries are negotiable. That's not kindness. That's surrender disguised as compassion. The greatest form of self-respect isn't found in winning arguments or proving someone wrong. It's found in protecting the mind, heart, and spirit that you've worked so hard to build. The moment you understand that your peace has value, everything changes. You begin making decisions from a place of strength instead of fear. You stop chasing validation from people who thrive on withholding it. More importantly, you finally understand that your greatest responsibility isn't changing toxic people, it's making sure they never change you. Toxic people don't show you who they are right away. One of the biggest misconceptions about manipulation is believing that it always arrives wearing an ugly face. Most people expect toxic behavior to announce itself with yelling, insults, intimidation, or obvious disrespect. If life worked that way, avoiding destructive people would be very simple, but life rarely follows such convenient patterns. The people who cause the deepest emotional wounds often begin by making you feel the safest. That's why first impressions can become dangerous when they're treated as final conclusions. A warm smile doesn't always reveal a warm heart. Generosity isn't always genuine. Charm isn't always sincerity. Sometimes those qualities are carefully presented because they lower your defenses and encourage you to trust someone long before they've actually earned that privilege. This isn't an invitation to become suspicious of everyone you meet. It's an invitation to slow down. We live in a culture that encourages instant friendships, instant romance, instant business partnerships, and instant trust. But character has never been something that can be measured in a single afternoon. Character is revealed over time through consistency, accountability, and repeated choices. Anyone can perform kindness when there's something to gain. The real question is how they behave when they have nothing to gain at all. Watch how people respond when life becomes inconvenient for them. Observe how they treat those who can't improve their status or provide them with an advantage. Pay attention to how they react when someone tells them no. These moments reveal far more than carefully rehearsed compliments ever could. Pressure has a unique way of exposing what's really beneath the surface. Many toxic individuals slowly begin testing your emotional boundaries long before you recognize what's happening. It may begin with a sarcastic remark that's quickly dismissed as just joking. Then comes the habit of minimizing your feelings whenever you express discomfort. Before long, they begin comparing you to others, questioning your judgment, or making subtle comments that chip away at your confidence. Each incident may seem too small to confront on its own, but together they create a dangerous pattern. That's how manipulation grows, rarely through one devastating event, but through countless small moments that slowly reshape how you see yourself. You begin wondering if you're too sensitive. Maybe you're expecting too much. Perhaps you're overreacting. Before long, you stopped questioning the unhealthy behavior in front of you and started questioning your own instincts instead. That's the exact point where many people lose their power. People who protect their peace understand something that others often overlook. They refuse to become emotionally attached before they've become emotionally observant. They don't rush to label someone as trustworthy simply because the conversation feels good. They quietly watch for consistency. They look for integrity that remains steady regardless of circumstances. They understand that real character isn't measured by promises, it's measured by patterns. Once you begin living this way, something remarkable happens. You stop feeling desperate for people to like you because your focus shifts toward discovering whether they are even worthy enough of sharing your space. That's a completely different mindset. Instead of wondering whether you're enough for someone else, you begin asking whether someone else's behavior deserves a place in your life. That single shift changes everything. The strongest people aren't the ones who never encounter toxic individuals. They are the ones who recognize unhealthy patterns early enough to keep those patterns from taking root. They understand that protecting their emotional well-being isn't selfish. It's one of the highest forms of wisdom a person can possess. Peace isn't something that accidentally appears in your life. It's something that's protected every single day by the choices you make about who receives access to your heart, your thoughts, and your time. When toxic people try to take control of your emotions. Recognizing toxic behavior is a powerful first step. Recognizing toxic behavior is a powerful first step, but recognition alone isn't enough. Plenty of people know they're dealing with someone who constantly lies, manipulates, criticizes, or creates unnecessary drama, yet they continue allowing that person to control their emotional world. That's where the real battle begins. It's one thing to identify unhealthy behavior. It's another thing to entirely stop giving it the power to determine how you think, how you feel, and how you move through your day. One of the greatest victories a toxic person can achieve isn't winning an argument, it's getting you to carry their negativity long after the conversation has ended. Think about how often someone can say one careless sentence, and hours later, you're still replaying it in your mind. You may have received encouragement from 10 different people that same day, but your attention becomes chained to the one voice that questions your worth. That's exactly how emotional manipulation works. It doesn't simply attack your confidence, it hijacks your focus. The sad reality is that many people never realize how much of their life has been stolen because they measure damage only by physical events. They don't recognize the emotional hours they've surrendered. They don't count the sleepless nights, the constant overthinking, the endless rehearsing of conversations that will never change anything. Toxic people don't always have to stand in front of you to control you. Sometimes they continue occupying your thoughts long after they've walked away, and that's often where the deepest damage is done. That's why emotional discipline is one of the greatest forms of personal freedom. When you refuse to let someone else's dysfunction become your daily burden, you've taken back something that could never be replaced. You've reclaimed your attention. You've reclaimed your peace. Most importantly, you've reclaimed ownership of your own mind. Don't hand someone else the remote control to your life. Far too many people unknowingly hand over control of their emotions to individuals who haven't earned that privilege. Every compliment lifts them to the clouds, while every criticism sends them crashing back to earth. They become emotional prisoners because they've allowed someone else's opinion to become the measuring stick for their own value. Think about how dangerous that really is. If another person's mood determines your mood, then you're no longer directing your own life. You're reacting to theirs. Every angry outburst, every silent treatment, every sarcastic remark, every dismissive gesture becomes another button that someone else has learned to press. Before long, your emotional state becomes predictable, and predictability is exactly what manipulators depend on. The strongest people don't eliminate emotion from their lives. That's impossible. They simply refuse to allow emotion to become their master. They understand that feelings provide valuable information, but they don't allow temporary emotions to make permanent decisions. Anger may tell you that a boundary has been crossed, but it shouldn't decide how you respond. Disappointment may reveal that your expectations weren't met, but it shouldn't convince you that your worth has somehow decreased. That's an important distinction that many people never learn. Emotional maturity doesn't mean becoming cold or detached. It means remaining fully aware of what you feel without allowing those feelings to dictate every action you take. The calmest person in the room isn't necessarily the weakest. More often than not, they're the strongest because they've learned that self-control always outlasts emotional impulse. Guilt is one of the favorite tools of manipulation. One of the most effective weapons toxic people use isn't anger, it's guilt. They become experts at convincing others to carry responsibilities that were never theirs to begin with. Somehow the person who caused the pain becomes the victim, while the person trying to protect themselves ends up apologizing. If you've ever walked away from a conversation wondering how you somehow became the guilty party after addressing someone else's behavior, you've experienced this tactic firsthand. The conversation gets twisted, the facts become blurred. Before you know it, you're explaining yourself instead of holding someone accountable for what they actually did. This emotional confusion isn't accidental. It's carefully cultivated because a confused person becomes easier to influence. Someone who constantly doubts their own instincts eventually begins looking to other people for permission to trust what they already know. That's one of the most dangerous places a person can find themselves. Never underestimate the importance of trusting your own observations. If someone's repeated behavior leaves you feeling consistently drained, anxious, disrespected, or emotionally exhausted, don't dismiss those feelings simply because the person occasionally behaves different. Temporary kindness doesn't erase consistent patterns. Occasional affection doesn't cancel repeated disrespect. Many people become trapped because they keep waiting for one wonderful day to outweigh months of unnecessary suffering. But life doesn't operate that way. Healthy relationships aren't built upon occasional moments of peace surrounded by constant emotional storms. They're built upon consistency. The power of pausing before you respond. One of the simplest habits can completely transform the way toxic people affect your life, and that's learning to pause before responding. Most manipulators expect immediate reactions. They anticipate anger. They count on defensiveness. They rely on emotional explosions because those reactions give them exactly what they're looking for. Every impulsive response becomes more material they can use to keep the conflict alive. But imagine what happens when you don't respond the way they expected. Imagine refusing to answer every accusation immediately. Imagine allowing silence to replace emotional chaos. Imagine choosing clarity over urgency. Suddenly, the entire conversation changes. A calm mind notices details that an emotional mind completely overlooks. You begin recognizing the hidden motives behind certain questions. You start seeing patterns instead of isolated incidents. You stop reacting to every emotional trap because you've developed a discipline to examine it before stepping into it. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Far too many people confuse immediate reactions with strength. They believe that speaking first somehow proves confidence. In reality, genuine confidence often reveals itself through restraint. It shows itself in the ability to remain composed while everyone else is rushing toward unnecessary conflict. There's incredible power in refusing to let someone rush your emotions. Every pause creates space for wisdom to enter the situation. Every thoughtful response weakens the control that emotional manipulation once had over your life. Not every opinion deserves a place in your mind. One of the healthiest realizations you'll ever have is understanding that every opinion doesn't deserve equal value. Some criticism is priceless because it's offered by people who genuinely care about your growth. They may challenge you. They may point out uncomfortable truths, but they do so because they want to see you become stronger. Toxic criticism has an entirely different purpose. Its goal isn't improvement. Its goal is control. It isn't designed to strengthen your character. It's designed to weaken your confidence until you begin seeking approval from the very person who's creating your insecurity. That's why discernment is essential. Ask yourself a simple question whenever someone criticizes you. Does this person's life demonstrate wisdom? Do they consistently treat others with respect? Do they hold themselves to the same standard they're demanding from everyone else? Or are they simply projecting their own frustrations onto whoever happens to be standing nearby? Those questions can save you years of unnecessary emotional pain. Not every voice deserves to become an authority inside your mind. Protect your attention with the same seriousness that you protect your finances, your health, and your home. Once someone gains unrestricted access to your thoughts, they gain influence over your decisions. That's far too much power to hand over carelessly. The strongest people eventually realize something that completely changes the direction of their lives. Peace isn't discovered, it's defended. It's protected by refusing to chase validation from people who never intended to give it. It's preserved by choosing wisdom over impulse, clarity over confusion, and purpose over unnecessary drama. Every day you strengthen that discipline, you become more difficult to manipulate because your emotional foundation no longer depends upon someone else's approval. And that's exactly where true freedom begins. Boundaries are the language of self-respect. There comes a defining moment in every person's life when they realize that protecting their peace isn't an act of selfishness, but an act of survival. Too many of us have been conditioned to believe that saying yes to every request, tolerating every offense, and making endless sacrifices somehow proves the depth of our character. While kindness is one of humanity's greatest strengths, kindness without discernment often becomes the very doorway through which manipulation enters our lives. Healthy people appreciate your generosity because they understand its value. Toxic people begin to expect it, and before long, what was once appreciated quietly transforms into something they believe they're entitled to receive. One of the greatest misconceptions surrounding healthy relationships is the belief that love requires unlimited access. It doesn't. Authentic relationships thrive on mutual respect, while toxic relationships survive on unrestricted control. The moment someone becomes offended because you've chosen to protect your time, your emotional well-being, or your personal space, they revealed far more about themselves than they may have intended. Very often, the resistance you receive isn't because your boundary is unreasonable. It's because someone has grown comfortable benefiting from the absence of one. Many people never lose themselves in one catastrophic event. Instead, their confidence disappears gradually through a long series of emotional compromises. One unnecessary favor leads to another. One disrespectful comment goes unchallenged. One broken promise gets excused. And before long, unhealthy behavior begins to feel ordinary. Months later, or even years later, they look in the mirror wondering why they no longer recognize themselves, never realizing that they surrendered small pieces of their identity each time they ignored what their instincts were desperately trying to tell them. That's why boundaries should never be viewed as walls designed to keep people out. They're foundations built to keep your self-respect standing strong. People learn how to treat you by watching what you allow. Whether we acknowledge it or not, every interaction teaches people something about the standards we've established for ourselves. It teaches them how much access they'll have in our lives, how they'll be expected to speak to us, and what behavior we're willing to overlook. Human nature has always tested limits. If someone repeatedly crosses a line without consequence, there's very little incentive for them to suddenly begin respecting that line. That's why consistency matters so much. A boundary only becomes meaningful when it's reinforced by action rather than words alone. Far too many people announce their boundaries during emotional moments, only to abandon them the first time someone pushes back. Unfortunately, inconsistently sends a powerful message. It quietly communicates that your standards are negotiable and that enough pressure can persuade you to ignore your own convictions. Every time you betray your own limits simply to avoid making someone uncomfortable, your confidence weakens a little more. On the other hand, every time you calmly stand by the standards you've established, something remarkable begins to happen. Your self-respect grows stronger because you've demonstrated to yourself that your peace is worth protecting. It's also important to understand that emotionally healthy people rarely become angry when reasonable boundaries are established. They may need time to adjust, but genuine respect eventually accepts healthy limits because it recognizes that relationships flourish when both people feel valued. Toxic individuals often respond very differently. They may accuse you of becoming distant, selfish, difficult, or uncaring. Those accusations can be painful to hear, especially if you've always considered yourself a giving person. But very often, those reactions reveal that what they truly valued wasn't you as an individual. They valued unrestricted access to your time, your attention, and your emotional energy. Silence is often more powerful than the perfect argument. One of the greatest lessons life eventually teaches is that not every disagreement deserves your participation. Society often celebrates those who always have the last word, always win the debate, and always defend themselves against criticism. But genuine strength operates very differently. Emotionally disciplined people understand that some conversations were never created to reach understanding. They were designed to provoke reactions, create confusion, and keep everyone emotionally exhausted. The greatest victory in those situations often comes from refusing the invitation altogether. Toxic individuals frequently depend upon emotional reactions because those reactions provide them with influence. Every defensive explanation creates another opportunity for your words to be twisted. Every emotional outburst becomes another excuse for them to redirect attention away from their own behavior. Before long, what should have been a simple conversation turns into an exhausting cycle where nothing is resolved and everyone leaves feeling more frustrated than ever before. That's why silence can become such a powerful form of self-protection. Silence doesn't always mean you have nothing to say. Sometimes it means you've recognized that the conversation no longer deserves your energy. Choosing silence shouldn't be confused with weakness or fear. In many situations, it requires far greater strength than arguing ever could. It takes discipline to remain calm when someone is intentionally attempting to provoke you. It takes maturity to recognize that your peace has greater value than your pride. Not every accusation deserves an answer. Not every misunderstanding requires correction. Some people have already decided what they want to believe, and no amount of explanation will persuade them otherwise. Continuing to argue simply gives manipulation additional opportunities to grow. Distance creates the clarity that constant conflict destroys. There are moments in life when creating distance becomes one of the healthiest decisions a person can make. Many people avoid this step because they fear loneliness, believing that remaining connected to unhealthy relationships is somehow better than standing alone. Yet emotional exhaustion is one of the loneliest experiences a person can endure. Constant criticism, manipulation, unpredictable behavior, and unnecessary conflicts slowly consume emotional energy until even ordinary days begin feeling heavy. That's not companionship, that's survival. Distance offers something arguments rarely provide: perspective. When you're standing in the middle of constant emotional chaos, it becomes incredibly difficult to recognize just how unhealthy your environment has become. Dysfunction gradually begins feeling normal because you've adapted to it day after day after day. But once you remove yourself from that environment, even temporarily, your thinking becomes clearer. You begin noticing how peaceful ordinary moments can actually feel. You realize how much of your mental energy had been consumed by problems that were never yours to solve. That renewed clarity becomes one of the greatest gifts distance can ever provide. Creating distance isn't about punishing another person. It's about giving yourself room to breathe again. It's about remembering who you were before someone else's negativity became a daily influence over your thoughts. Sometimes stepping away isn't the end of your healing, it's the beginning of it. Stop building your future around someone else's potential. Perhaps the greatest emotional trap anyone can fall into is believing that enough love, patience, sacrifice, or loyalty will eventually transform someone who has no genuine desire to transform themselves. Too many people remain emotionally imprisoned because they've fallen in love with potential instead of accepting reality. They hold on to beautiful memories, inspiring promises, and occasional moments of kindness while repeatedly overlooking the larger pattern that's unfolding before them. Unfortunately, isolated moments of improvement can't erase years of consistent behavior. Real change has never been measured by emotional speeches or temporary efforts made during moments of crisis. Genuine transformation reveals itself through consistency. It's demonstrated over weeks, months, and years through repeated choices that reflect accountability and personal growth. That's why wise people eventually stop asking who someone could become someday and begin paying closer attention to who they're consistently choosing to be today. That shift in perspective protects them from investing years chasing possibilities while ignoring reality. The greatest investment you'll ever make isn't dedicating your life to repairing someone else's character. It's strengthening your own. Every hour spent becoming wiser, calmer, healthier, and more emotionally disciplined becomes an investment that no toxic person could ever take away from you. As your purpose grows larger than the chaos surrounding you, something remarkable begins to happen. The drama that once consumed your attention gradually loses its influence because your life is now centered on growth rather than conflict. That's when true freedom finally begins to emerge, not because toxic people disappeared, but because they've lost the ability to determine the direction of your life. The greatest victory isn't changing them, it's changing your life. As this journey comes to a close, one truth rises above every lesson we've explored. The smartest way to deal with toxic people has never been about defeating them in arguments, exposing every lie they tell, or making them finally admit that they're wrong. Those victories are temporary, and many toxic individuals will never willingly give you the satisfaction of acknowledgement. Real victory begins the moment you stop making their behavior the center of your emotional world. That's when your life starts belonging to you again instead of revolving around someone else's chaos. The greatest transformation takes place when your attention shifts inward. Instead of asking why someone continues to manipulate, criticize, or disrespect you, begin asking what changes you need to make to ensure those behaviors no longer have access to your peace. Every painful experience contains a lesson if you're willing to learn from it. Rather than allowing toxic encounters to harden your heart or poison your outlook on humanity, allow them to sharpen your discernment. Let them teach you the value of patience, the necessity of healthy boundaries, and the importance of trusting your instincts before your emotions become deeply invested. There will always be people who thrive on conflict, confusion, and emotional control. You cannot eliminate them from the world, but you can eliminate the influence they have over your life. Every decision you make to protect your mind, your confidence, and your emotional health becomes another brick in the foundation of a stronger future. As that foundation grows, you'll discover something remarkable. The people who once had the power to disrupt your entire day will eventually become little more than distant memories. Their opinions lose their weight because your identity is no longer built upon their approval. One of the greatest freedoms you'll ever experience comes when you realize that your purpose is far too important to be delayed by someone else's dysfunction. Every hour spent defending yourself against manipulation is an hour that could have been invested in building your dreams. Every day spent trying to rescue someone who refuses to rescue themselves is another day stolen from your own personal growth. Life moves far too quickly to spend it trapped in emotional battles that have no finish line. Your energy is one of your most valuable resources, and where you invest it will ultimately determine the quality of the life you create. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. Peace isn't something that's handed to you by fortunate circumstances or perfect relationships. It's something you intentionally cultivate through the choices you make every single day. It's choosing wisdom over impulse, discipline over emotional reaction, and purpose over unnecessary conflict. It's recognizing that while you cannot control the hearts of other people, you remain completely responsible for protecting your own. When you finally embrace that truth, toxic people lose their greatest weapon because they've lost access to the one place they've worked so hard to occupy: your mind. The journey toward emotional freedom doesn't happen overnight, and it certainly isn't without moments of discomfort. There will be times when standing firm feels alone, when saying no feels unfamiliar, and when walking away feels more difficult than staying. Yet every healthy decision you make today becomes an investment in a more peaceful tomorrow. Each boundary strengthens your confidence. Each lesson deepens your wisdom. Each act of self-respect reminds you that your life was never meant to be lived under the shadow of someone else's unhealthy behavior. Never underestimate the quiet strength that comes from living a life guided by principles instead of emotions. People who master themselves become extraordinarily difficult to manipulate because they no longer chase validation, fear criticism, or depend upon the approval of others to feel complete. Their confidence grows from within, nourished by integrity, discipline, and the unwavering commitment to becoming the best version of themselves. That's the kind of confidence that cannot be taken away because it wasn't given by another person in the first place. As you move forward from this moment, remember that your greatest responsibility isn't proving your worth to people who've already decided not to see it. Your responsibility is to honor the life you've been given by protecting your peace, guarding your character, and refusing to allow bitterness to replace wisdom. The strongest people aren't remembered because they defeated every enemy that crossed their path. They're remembered because they refused to allow those enemies to reshape who they were. In the end, the smartest way to deal with toxic people isn't simply learning how to recognize them. It's becoming so emotionally grounded, so mentally disciplined, and so purpose-driven that their presence no longer determines the direction of your life. Now that's true freedom. That's genuine strength. And that's the kind of peace that no manipulator, no critic, and no toxic personality could ever steal from you once you've claimed it for yourself. I hope these words have motivated you into a higher level of healing. It's always a pleasure to vibe here with you. Leave a comment or two, and always go to LanceScurvX.com to catch everything we do. Much love to you all. On to the next one. LanceScurv out. Peace.